So while we're being joined by a few of our starstruck stragglers, I'll just make a brief introduction for our next speaker. Again, another fantastic guest speaker who's a member of faculty here at the university. You can see from your programs his full designation. Professor Kishalay is a founding member, really, of our School of Journalism and Communications, and has had an illustrious career as a journalist in this country, working in really interesting areas in conflict zones all around the region and in fact all around the world. It's probably fitting that you're carrying a newspaper here to this media lecture, but today's lesson or seminar really is about learning about the evolution of mainstream media in India, because it's a fascinating beast. And actually the registrar in his introductory session mentioned to the students that one of the common values that Australia and India have is the strong and independent media presence and freedom of expression between the two countries, and media playing an important role in that in both countries. So this actually brings that initial theme back home, and Professor Kishalay will shed some light on his journey and experiences in media, and answer any questions that you guys might have as well on the topic. So please join me in welcoming our next speaker for today.
Hi, good morning. Assuming that all of you are undergraduate students, and you all are students of what? Humanities, arts, law? Okay. Law, all of you? Okay. Law and journalism has a very, very strong connection. Often as a journalist, I felt that I felt inadequate because of not knowing the legal history, of not understanding law well enough. And a major part of my work was with human rights violation, and the books that I've written were also on that, and I wish that I knew law a little better. So just to give you a context of, you may be wondering why you are listening to a journalist if you're a law student. But to give you that, it's very, very, the intersection between law and journalism is very strong. When I saw the title out here, Evolution of Mainstream Media in India, the word mainstream kind of irks me. There is a lot of debate that you may read sometime in your life about the whole debate of mainstream and periphery. Because what is mainstream and what is periphery? There's a whole, for years this debate has been going on around the world. It's pretty furious, this debate about mainstream and periphery. And in India too, we don't have a debate really, but we have a situation. So I technically represent mainstream media. Mainstream media would mean I represented English media, which happened out of Delhi. And I did not work in places which were far-flung, which were away from Delhi. And so to look at Delhi as a power center, to look at Delhi as a microcosm of India would be actually incorrect. So I have a reservation about the word mainstream. So we constantly say mainstreaming. I don't know. Is that a narrative in Australia at all about mainstreaming? Do you have a narrative about periphery and mainstream in Australia? Yeah. So we have all throughout my journalistic career, I have been accused whenever I went to places that, you are a mainstream journalist. You don't write enough about us. So that was always because it's like being Eurocentric, around the world. So out here, it's very Delhi-centric. Media, the English media is very Delhi-centric. And when I say Delhi-centric, even within Delhi, there is a mainstream and there is a periphery. So it is going to be Central Delhi and South Delhi, where most of the media offices operate out of. So, and the rest of West Delhi and East Delhi is not even represented. So if you pick up this newspaper, which is one of the best newspapers in the country, you wouldn't find West Delhi news out here. You would hardly find, 95% of India out here is not represented. That has, the reason for this is not just the mainstream periphery representation, but there's a, media across the world is in deep crisis. Probably not since the Second World War have we seen a kind of the crisis that we see in media across the world. I don't know what the situation in Australia is. I do not follow, I must admit, media in Australia because, y'all are a nice country. When in a nice countries, nice places don't need media. So I don't quite agree with Sean when he said that India and Australia have very vibrant media. I think media is basically a watchdog. When you talk about India, by now, how long have you spent in India? How many days have you been here now? A week. Okay. It takes a damn lifetime to figure this place out. I mean, I haven't seen all of India myself. I grew up in a small hill town far away in the eastern tip of India, very unlike what you have seen so far of India. I didn't grow up in this India. I went to an Irish Catholic missionary school. I grew up with plum and peach and fruit trees that you don't find out here in my house. And then suddenly one fine day I was, I left that place to study outside and take up occupation. I came to Bombay and, everything changed. I mean, I couldn't figure out what was happening. I was a small town boy. I came to this big city, but I was still considered mainstream. Because in India, when I'm talking about mainstream and periphery, I'll talk about the media a little, but I'm just trying to give you a sense of what mainstream and periphery also means. It is a country of 1.4 billion people. The size of the country is probably, you could imagine the size because Australia is also very big, but Australia is not populated enough. We have about 700 languages out here, and many of them are active languages, some are not active languages. There are, hundreds and thousands of traditional skills that people still follow, which are not One of the serious problems that we face in this country is that there is hardly any documentation. So I can't even tell you to go to a particular site and check out, okay, this is all about India. There is no really repository where you would find enough of India. And that is one of the challenges that media faces while documenting. Because what does media do? Media, apart from being a watchdog, it chronicles our times. Okay, we are chroniclers. So to chronicle, I don't know, if there is any place which I can lead you to where you can say, okay, here you go and here's everything about India. There is no such place as where everything's about India. It'll take you years and years to figure out if you ever are interested in India to really understand this country. And in periphery and mainstream, to come back to that again, so there is an India where people do not look like me. As in when I'm saying look like me, so there is a racial difference in various regions of India. But there's one, the central part, say from Delhi down to south, there would be people who would look similar to each other. By similar, is what is called the mainstreaming. And there would be people around around India on the borders, let's say, who are racially different, and they are sometimes not even considered to be Indian. Sometimes they walk into a hotel and at the front office they'll be asked for a passport. Okay, so there is in that sense a lot of discrimination within India. So we are not even talking about people coming out from outside India. So we are talking about within India. So there are many Indias within India. And then to talk about mainstream media and the peripheral media or non-mainstream media becomes extremely difficult. But let me take you back to a story I was sitting in the newsroom. So just to tell you where I come from, I told you where I grew up in a small little town, and I worked almost 20 years in a television network called NDTV, which was the New Delhi Television. It's unfortunately dying right now, but it was India's biggest television network. And I covered conflict for most part of my career. Conflict in India is very, very deep and around. So I covered conflict in India and around the neighboring countries. And India, if you know, according to surveys, according to a certain arithmetic that international surveyors do, is the second highest country in the world. I mean, it's only second to Myanmar with the highest rate of conflict. Okay, so we are not even talking of Latin America, we are not talking of the Middle East, West Asia, not even Afghanistan. India has more conflict than any of these countries. If you look at the overall kind of conflict, there can be localized conflict. We are not only looking at terrorism. Terrorism came only, 20 years back in that sense, where it became a more household discourse. But in India, we've had insurgency, we've had communal riots, we've had separatism, we've had extremism, with all forms of strife has been there in India and the neighborhood. And in a particular measure, they say that in 60 years, India has about 180 years of conflict. I don't know how they measure this, but just to give you a sense that it is a very conflict-ridden place. And again, sitting in Delhi, you can barely understand. Sitting in Sonipat, you can barely understand what's happening in various parts of the country. So it's a land of million mutinies, as some authors would have said. So everyone's rebelling, everyone's revolting, everyone's dissenting because of an unbelievable level of inequality. So when the maker of the person who drafted the Indian Constitution, B.R. Ambedkar, who was himself a Dalit. Dalit in this country means of the lowest caste. In India, you see, to understand India, you have to understand caste. A very embarrassing and shameful division of the society. But at many levels, the caste still plays out. At many levels, even the level at which the academia works, the level at which bureaucracy works, the level at which the government works, the level at which society works. At every level, caste is basically the key. It is basically the coding and coding that you do on your computer in Indian codes, and to decode India, you have to understand caste. So Ambedkar belonged to the lowest caste in that sense, but he went and he was a brilliant student, barrister, and he came from Cambridge, and he was a great leader, and he was drafting the Constitution, which was modeled after the British Constitution. And when he handed over the Constitution to the Constituent Assembly, he said something which is very prophetic. He actually said that, I think we committed a mistake. While we have written down a fine political democracy for India, I think there is no social democracy, there is no economic democracy, and that is going to explode on our faces someday. And it didn't take very long since the time Ambedkar said. 10 years, 15 years after Ambedkar uttered these words, India just went up in flames. And that flame has not been doused yet. So India, in many ways, many parts of India, is burning every day. And it becomes a huge challenge for journalists then to cover. Now, to specifically come to that story I was telling you. So I was sitting in this newsroom in South Delhi of a fair, sophisticated television network, and it was 1995. Okay, y'all were not born then. Okay. So, and we used to, that time we had a national broadcasting organization which still exists called the Doordarshan. So there wasn't any private television channels. So, the whole concept of private satellite television channels came much later. Not much later, around the same time, and it came actually from Australia, the whole concept of satellite television and private channels. Most parts of the world had, one major television channel, which was usually either the government broadcasting corporation or something like a BBC, which was autonomous but with public subscription. Okay, but in India, similarly, there was a government broadcasting corporation which was called the Doordarshan, based out of Delhi, and we were some private organizations which had just come up. Ours was one, and we would do the news we were doing one program called The World This Week, which was an international roundup, a weekly roundup, and then, we were told that we could do the news. We were doing the news. So we would record the news 2 hours before the time on a tape, this big tape. Actually, it was to be this big tape, and this became this big tape. So the whole evolution has been pretty dramatic over the last 25 years of media across the world. And we had riders on motorbikes, and they would, so after the recording, they would take the tape and they would actually, ride to the hub of the National Broadcasting Office, and they would play it out. Now, that was the arrangement. So it was the first day that we would be doing the news for the 9 o'clock. Out here in India, the 9 o'clock, the 9 p.m. news was the sacrosanct news. Because those days, you didn't have news for 24 hours. So the 24-hour cycle of news that you grew up with, okay, or the 24-hour, every millisecond news breaking, I did not grow up with that. Or I did not even work in that. We had news once a day. And that was 9 p.m. So we had all the time to do our news. Afternoon, we'd go to a pub actually and, have a beer and come back and write a news. And then suddenly one fine day, of course, everything changed and we were told, oh, news is 24 hours. It was so tough to, adjust and accommodate to that news cycle. But anyway, we had done the news, we'd written the news, we'd recorded the news, and suddenly gentleman from the Prime Minister's office calls up and asks my boss that, what on earth are you thinking you're doing? And he said that we are doing the news. He says, no, only the government can do the news. So not very long ago, 1995, in India, in many parts of the world as well, the government had the sole authority to tell the news to the people. So, which means the government would tell the news which suited the government. So till 1995, all that the people got to know as far as information is concerned was what the government's version was, and which is the story for generations before us, throughout the civilization. The entire story of human civilization has been told by victors, has been told by hunters, not the hunted, right? So you had kings who wrote edicts, and the king would write whose story, whose glory. Your own glory. Obviously, the king wouldn't say that I have been defeated. The king would. So all this, the entire human history has been chronicled by emperors and kings and whoever, dictators, whoever, which suited them. And that becomes a great challenge of really going back and, re-evaluating the human history. So till 1995, even in India, the news was being given to you or given to the people by the government. And so which you did not know the other story. So the other side of the story was just not available to anybody. And then we entered there. So anyway, at that point of the time, that argument was happening. So we said, well, then you are not going to have a news at 9 o'clock because, you guys didn't do the news. We were supposed to do the news. We got the contract and we showed them the paper, this, that, whatever. I don't remember the exact details of what happened because the gentleman was not conversing with me. I'm just reconstructing a situation because I was sitting there in the newsroom. And the gentleman agreed. He says, okay, you can't call it news. You can call it current affairs. I mean, whatever the difference is, but so he says news is only the government's exclusive domain. You can do current affairs. So he says you can call it current affairs program. So we said okay, we'll call it current affairs program, and ran as current affairs program. And later became a program called News Tonight. After a couple of years, we continued doing. We used to cover elections in a big way, and then of course 24 hours came. Then Murdoch came into India. I mean, I don't know whether the Murdoch University is the same as has anything to do with Murdoch, the media guy. Probably not. So anyway, but the media Murdoch came to India with and started the Star News, and we were doing the Star News for a number of years, and then we went to have our own channel, satellite channel. Interestingly, the man who had told us that news is only the exclusive domain of the government, after his retirement, settled in a state of Andhra Pradesh in India, which actually has about 500 private channels. So he must be enjoying all his private channels now, which he did not believe could deliver news to him. But so that was the great boom around the world of privatization of news. The digital technology was just about coming. We had made great advancements in terms of broadcasting technology around the world. It was an aspirational India. Everybody wanted to have a television. Everybody wanted to be on television. The newspaper sales had dipped, but media was all over the place because it was an aspirational, there were challenges around, but it was also an aspirational time for India. Liberalization had set in. People had more money, which means when people had more money, which means what? You're getting advertising revenues more. So your media runs because of advertising revenues. So these are all connected. You see, they're not just, you can't see them in silos. So you look at your economy getting better means better advertising revenue, means more money coming in or resource coming into media companies. And if more resource comes in, then media can do better independent journalism. But I think sometime late 90s, early 2000, around the world again, without some conspiracy, but it's just as something which is more organic. I think corporates figured out that the media guys don't have a revenue model in their way. I mean, unlike law firms, law firms have a revenue model, I suppose. But what is the revenue model for a media firm? There is no revenue model. It's like we give space, you give me advertisement. But if you don't give me advertisement, then what happens? Where do I get the money from? I don't. I choke. So the corporates realize that why don't we choke these guys for a while, and actually, instead of just getting space from them, we dictate the agenda. And from United States to India, or whatever, in whichever countries there was some amount of free media and free press, the corporates started controlling the media, the mainstream media. And the peripheral media was already being controlled because the peripheral media anyway did not have money. In order to sustain these organizations, the media buckled. So they started giving in because otherwise they would not be existent. I mean, just 2 weeks back, my own organization where I worked, 550 people were laid off. In 2017 in India, roughly about 10,000 journalists have lost their job. Even the newsrooms of New York Times and Washington Post have been laying off people. So we are talking of legacy newspapers, we are talking of legacy media, we are talking of new media, we are talking of every form of media that's laying off because the corporates they want to control the agenda. And they have very successfully controlled the agenda. They have controlled the agenda in India, they've controlled the agenda in the United States, they are controlling the agenda almost everywhere. Because the media has run out of money, because the media does not have a revenue model. And mainstream media is suffering as much as the non-mainstream media. I mean, there's nothing called non-mainstream media, but I mean, I am just using the word because this is the title of the talk today. The non-mainstream media is in such a bad shape, and they are not in such a bad shape in terms of money because they're getting money, but they're in a terrible shape in terms of doing independent journalism because they've completely sold out, because their existence depends on whether you can sell yourself or not. And even top-line journalists have buckled in India over the last few years. And the present regime, the present government, very fervently believes that they need to control the media. I mean, every regime thinks that they need to control the media because controlling the media means controlling power. I mean, once you control the media, so you need to control the judiciary, you need to control the media. Okay, these are the two pillars that you need to control. So when you are law students, you understand that judicial activism in India is now at the highest level. I mean, for the last 5 years or the last 10 years, I think India has survived and sustained because of judicial activism. In a very big way, every issue that should have been addressed by the executive and the legislature, okay, which means the government, right? So you know the pillars of democracy. I mean, you have the government, and you have the bureaucracy, and you have the judiciary, and then you have the fourth pillar, which is the media. But the bureaucracy has completely tied their own hands up, and they are just refusing to take any decision. The government's decision is obviously anathema to what the social welfare or the public welfare should be. I mean, the government may disagree, but there are enough examples to show. So that is where the judiciary has stepped in. So the Indian judiciary has played an exemplary role in the last 10 years. They have played a role. There are problems with the Indian judiciary, huge problems of the number of cases piled up, the number of cases not being dispensed, and etc. But the intervention of the judiciary in India is what has given some hope for the common Indian citizen to say that, well, someone's going to listen to us. And the media, which was playing a very vibrant role, suddenly has disappeared. Because the media does not exist any longer. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the media does not exist. I mean, people would say that that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but I'd rather resort to the exaggeration because the media should have been, at this point of time, far more vibrant than where we are today. We are today in an absolute state of crisis. And I'd like to hear what the situation in Australia is, because I know what the situation in Africa is, I know what the situation in China is, I know what the situation in Bangladesh, from where she comes, I know the situation in China or Korea or even Singapore or most of the countries. Media is completely non-existent in many of these places, and that's a real worry for anybody who wants honest, independent, free-flowing information. Mainstreaming, excuse me. Now, the other problem of media, even when we had a revenue model, the other problem that we had in this country, and I don't know whether that's the same in your country, is that the entire country was not covered. Now, the problem of the entire country not being covered is that we, as a private organization, started playing the role of a national broadcaster. But we did not have the resources. We had just 2,000 people on our rolls. I mean, for a 1.4 billion people, you can't have just 2,000 people covering it. I mean, this is ridiculous. So I covered 12 states. You understand what states are in India? I mean, so I covered 12 states alone. I mean, even if I had a drone or a helicopter or a jet plane with me, I couldn't have covered 12 states fairly. So I prioritized. I only went to, so if there were 2 massacres where in one 3 people died and another 20 people died, I chose that I had to go to the 20 people. So the place where 3 people died wouldn't be covered. And since I was moving from one massacre to another massacre, my other stories on the ground were not being covered, but the priority of people dying was much more than a building collapsing. So the issues on the ground was not being addressed. The issues were not being talked about. We were lagging behind really big time because we did not have, and the national broadcaster was not playing its role. The national broadcaster had its resources, has its resources, adequate resources. It does not even need to, look anywhere else. And then, this is very disturbing, I know. When I teach out here, I keep looking at them and I pull the things down, the drapes down. Every time I feel that this guy's going to fall or hit his head or something of that sort. But so the lack of the national broadcaster playing its natural role, put the onus on private players, but the private players did not have the wherewithal to really cover India. And at this point of time, I don't even think 95% of India is covered. So because reportage stopped, by the time I quit Daily News by 2013, and by then I was tired. I didn't quit because of these reasons. I was just exhausted being on the ground for 20 years, covering just counting body bags. So I thought I'll do something else. I signed up a few books. I started writing books, and I tried to understand the digital medium, which I think none of us have actually understood the digital medium well enough. We're still grappling to understand what digital is. And then I started teaching here, journalism students, which makes it, sometimes I find it funny that we teach students journalism because I don't know what the future of journalism is. Where are they going to go? What jobs are they going to do? Do we have one of the main foundations of journalism is ethics. I mean, and all around you see is completely unethical journalism happening. So when I teach ethics in the class to them, it sometimes feels hollow because what are they going to do with this ethics? Because that's not how it's been working. But the only hope that maybe there'll be a churning, maybe things are going to change, turn around. Maybe there will be sometimes when the going gets really, really bad and really, really tough, then perhaps media reinvents itself, because without a vibrant, independent, strong media, you cannot have any country moving ahead or any situation. The media, because you see that there is, as law students, you would appreciate that there are excuse me, there are a lot of areas where even as a jurist or even as a legal practitioner, you will not be able to raise your voice, utter words, make public pronouncements, because you're always guided within certain with libel, etc., etc., etc. You see, media is the only institution, if I may say, though there is nothing called a media because everything is individual. But if you see it as one institution, media is the only institution who has the ability and who has the right to question anybody. So I have the right to question even the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, which a government officer or anybody else will not be able to do. There will be contempt of court. I mean, I cannot be charged of contempt. Okay, I can be charged in some situations, but usually a common citizen is not going to question a judgment by the Supreme Court immediately. I mean, they can file a case again. They can file a case against that judgment, and there can be a hearing, but that has to be admitted, and that follows a certain process. But as a journalist, I have the right to question it the moment it's pronounced. I can actually say anything and get away. I mean, that doesn't mean one should say anything and get away, because that's what happens in most cases. But I'm saying that if you follow the procedure, so that is why you need a vibrant media, because the media does not have to go through that procedural, bureaucratic red tapeism to put things. We need, and our job is to question the status quo. So the fundamentals of media, of journalism, is to question the status quo. So I could be questioning the legal, statutes that you have. I mean, that is the job of the media. To say that, just because it's a legal statute does not mean everyone will have to abide by it, because this is not in favor of people's welfare. So please change the legal statute. That could be these are questions. Just because we are saying it's not going to change, but I'm saying that we can start a debate. The media is there to be able to start a debate, to be able to trigger debates, to be able to shake the collective consciousness of people. And that, unfortunately, at this particular time, in India and around the world, is not happening. We are not. We have been too tamed. We have buckled. We have sold ourselves. We are not questioning the status quo. We are not shaking up the collective consciousness of people, and that's really unfortunate. But
Sorry to interrupt you.
Sure. Please interrupt. I mean, I'm not giving a keynote lecture, so this is like, please raise your hands and ask questions.
Actually, we are having a totally different views from you today. The other day, I forget the name of the professor. He said that we are fortunate enough to have independent media. So, but you are saying that I agree with you. I was not agree with him. But then I thought, like, maybe because I am not living in India at the moment, maybe he will be right. But he said that media in India is like very independent, or we are fortunate. But you are saying that it's all controlled by government. So to whom we should
Who we should believe?
yeah.
Or you have to take a call. See, I'm telling you the evolution. It was an independent media. There is a lot of independence. That's what I'm saying. If you compare with North Korea or China, I mean, we are an independent media. No one is telling me what to write exactly. But I just explained to you the economics of media. There is no revenue model. So when you do not have a revenue model, then it becomes easier for the corporate or for the government or for any interested vested party to control you. How will you say, for example, this newspaper, what is the cost of this damn newspaper? It comes for 12 rupees in Srinagar. 5 rupees. Okay, this is 5 rupees. Now this has how many pages? It has 28 pages of news, right? Now, if you calculate, is it possible that it can be sold only at 5 rupees? With 5 rupees, can you get good news? 5 rupees is nothing. You get nothing with 5 rupees. So, unless people are willing to pay 100 rupees for this newspaper, they will not get good news. Because it's not possible to sustain a newspaper selling it for 5 rupees. So, the revenue model has to change. And it's like I'm saying that I can write an op-ed. I mean, I write op-eds these days, I don't report. But when I write an op-ed, no one is going to change that. So there is a large space there for practicing independent media, but it's increasingly kind of getting squeezed, and it will get really worse because there is no revenue model. I'm saying this is what the corporates how they would function.
Do your, I assume your newspapers have online versions. Do your versions require payment or some kind of membership to pay?
No, the paywalls, some of them have paywalls, but the paywalls are not working. Yeah, paywalls are not working anywhere in the world. And that's why I'm saying that we are still trying to grapple with the digital thing. The digital promise has not been delivered. When the digital technology first came in, I had broken my jaw, so I couldn't speak for some time. And so that's how I was given the responsibility of launching the digital channel because I didn't have to talk. So I started learning something called WAP. It was called Wireless Access Protocol. So that time when the first thing came, internet. So there was internet was just coming in. So there was WAP and there was pager and there was whatever. And I did something called online where you could pick up so the first mobile phones had come. So you could go to, and they were very heavy. They were very big and they were very expensive. And so you could press 9 and then someone would say, oh, welcome to whatever. If you want political news, press 1. It was very rudimentary. So, and using this technology. So I thought I'm completely technophobic, but all my life I had to deal with technology. And with very fast changing technology because, in the broadcast medium, the technology changed almost every 3 months, 4 months. And so that was the digital thing, and I thought that I had heralded the coming of new age technology. But unfortunately, even after so many years, there is no revenue from digital technology. It's so easy, it's so fast, the footprint is so wide, and yet you would say, for example, if you are a company making bottled water, you would pay $1 million to a television program spot, but not pay just a few dollars to a website. And I don't understand what the logic is, because the website has a much larger reach than the television channel, a satellite channel, but still this shift hasn't happened.
If you think the quality of the printed newspapers, which are cheap, is going down, then more independent and more, I guess, perhaps better quality media is being published online. Do you think that the fact that only a certain proportion of the population can access digital media contributes to ongoing disparity in who can access better quality media?
Yeah, there'll be disparity as well, considering the number of people who can.
Yeah.
In India, the number of people accessing mobile technology is very high.
Yeah.
But there'll be a language problem.
Yeah.
Because majority of the people will not read in English. And most of these online versions are going to be in English. Advertisers have a problem of who to pay, and that's probably one of the reasons, because if it had one language, maybe it would have been easier. You easily have, like I told you, 100 languages. So you got to have, at least in one area, if not 100, you got to have like 4 or 5 languages of the same news to be able to reach out to that kind of population, which is possible. It's not possible. I don't see it happening anytime soon. Also, what happens, you see, where the whole stress on mainstream media and non-mainstream media happens is, mainstream media is something that impacts policies. Okay, it's not a great thing, but the policymakers will pick up a newspaper like this, will not pick up 100 other newspapers that are being published elsewhere. And so if you can get an editorial in a newspaper like this, then you are more likely to be able to make some impact, or to be able to get through to the policymakers. If you were writing on a really nice digital platform, which has a great reach, unlikely the policymaker actually even knows of that digital platform, would be going to the digital platform. The time when you all become policymakers, you all run the country, things may be different because you all will only use digital technology. So the world may change in another 5, 10 years. Currently, the policymakers are still from the old school, right? I don't have a problem using digital technology, but I still love my newspaper, the hard copy in the morning with my cup of tea. I still follow that routine. I want my students to take down notes on a notebook with a pen. I discourage them from using the computer to take down notes, because in a field you don't carry a computer to take down notes. You can't do that. Nobody in the world would ever do that. I mean, even if you're a wildlife enthusiast or a investigator or the field, you would be using your pen and paper, and the pen and paper notes it's fun to write down the notes on pen and paper. I can't do that on a computer, and computer seems too sanitized to me to write notes on. So there will be, I don't think so this is going to go away entirely from our lives. Just like books will not go away. I mean, the e-book sales have actually in 2017, 2016 has gone down worldwide. There was a surge. Everyone thought that was okay, the hard copy books are out and e-books are in, but because I still like going to a bookshop and browse through books. I mean, I can't buy books online unless I know which book to buy. So I can't browse books online. I mean, there's no fun. I mean, the whole charm of book buying is gone if I do it online. We keep talking to only the computer and to our, I suppose, the phone. But though news is going to shift entirely, I mean, the consumption of news is going to be largely over digital media. I mean, this is also available on digital media, though I like reading it, but I'm saying that maybe in 5-10 years, do you think it's going to change? Do you think you guys are going to go to digital or still read the newspaper or book or...
I think books, definitely newspaper. I'm not too sure any of us read it on a daily basis anymore. But like in terms of what you're saying, it's quite interesting because it kind of reminds me of the theory of like endowment. So which it talks about how humans, they actually put more value in things that they own, like they can see, and that kind of comes into why digital kind of media isn't, like it doesn't have the same kind of like charm it has with like physical like newspapers, because when you see a newspaper in front of you and you own it, you know it belongs to you and you value it more than something you can find online which you don't actually own. So just kind of a point. But also I have another question for you. In your career, what do you think is your biggest regret?
When you join journalism, however naive it may sound, but you join with an idealism that you will impact, that your stories will change things. I don't think so. Anything has changed. So my biggest regret would be that while persistently and consistently one has very doggedly done stories, there were impact on, say, individual stories, but the system didn't change. Nothing really changed. So for my personal glory, I can, delude myself thinking that, that story I had done, something happened. But that was just one-off, something happened. That didn't really change anything for the vast majority of people. So that's my regret. I mean, I don't think so anything changes.
And what is it that you want to change?
I mean, there are so many things. But okay, let me tell you about one book that I wrote, and because, as a result of, it's called Blood on My Hands: Confessions of Staged Encounters. So this is something to do with law, and that's why I mentioned that. So India has a very, very large percentage of staged encounters. Interestingly, I tell you, when I wrote this book, my first editor, it was published by a publishing house called HarperCollins, and so a book goes through several stages of editing, right? So you have a structural editor, and you have a copy editor, and you have a, so it's a tedious process of. So my first editor was an Australian gentleman, and the publisher must have, they have editors all over the world. So he called up. His name was Carl, and Carl called me up, and he had just received the manuscript. He hadn't read the book. He was just reading me up online. He was brilliant, actually, as an editor, because he first tried to figure out what are the kind of words I use, what are the kind of work that I've done, so that before he actually reads the manuscript. And he told me, he asked me this question. He said, is it a romantic thriller? So I said, no, Carl. There is no romance in it. It's not thriller. It's like just plain simple killing. And I realized that how in different parts of the world words have different connotations and meanings. So he said, but he said you said encounter. So I said, yeah, encounter. Now he says then he, of course, just to cut it short, I'm saying, so basically in the West, an encounter refers to a romantic encounter, an encounter with a person. You encounter a person or a situation. In India, I don't know at what point of time, the word encounter entered the lexicon as killing. So we have encounters by the police and by the army on Indian people, and often very innocent civilians. So I would cover these encounters, but these encounters would happen in remote areas, one or two. Most of the times it didn't merit me going to that distance to really investigate on the encounter. And even if I investigated, journalists don't have, we don't have forensic skill. I don't have ballistic information. How do I investigate? Okay, I would reach a area where a person had been killed, say 24 hours later after the death, and the person would not be there, obviously would be somewhere in the hospital or dead or buried or cremated or whatever. And then what do I do going there? So unless there was a backlash, you understand what is the backlash? Unless there were local people would have reacted against the killing, I wouldn't go. So for years we suspected that these killings were not genuine. And then in certain areas, say, from his home state in Punjab, you're not from Punjab, I understand?
Haryana.
You're from Haryana, okay.
Originally from Punjab.
Originally from Punjab. So, but in Punjab went through years of very, very severe terrorism, and during those years there were hundreds and thousands of people who were just killed as encounters. Hundreds of people get killed in Jammu and Kashmir as in encounters, in India's northeast as encounters, in many parts of the country as encounters. And then what happened was, I didn't plan to write this book, and I was sitting and having a drink with an army officer who knew me, and I had just left, like I told you, Daily News in 2013, and I was having this evening, I was sitting with him, and he turned to me, and after a couple of drinks, he says, he said, do you remember you had covered this news of 7 Harkatul Jihadi Islami militants who entered India and they were killed in an early morning encounter? So I said, yeah. I said, what about that? He said, that was all bullshit. They were not. He said, did you ever try to find out? What was Houji, militants, terrorists doing out there? So I said, but that was the official release. He said, yeah, but he didn't go beyond the official release. I said, yeah, we don't go beyond the official release for every release because we don't have the resource. I don't have the time. I said, but how do you know? And then he suddenly started saying, he says, something, he called me by my name, and he says, every single encounter death that you have covered is a false. You have no idea of what you did. So I felt a little sheepish, I felt a little silly, but I said, but do you have proof? And then he went on telling me, and I said that can I record you? And he says, yes, you can. But he says, I know that you'll not, tell anyone ever about this, because, I didn't want to record him to put him on record, but I wanted to record him to not take down notes then, but to just listen to him. Because sometimes what happens, when you're taking down notes, when the person is speaking, it's distracting for the person. So I started recording him. I didn't think of a book then. And I ran into a magazine, and they wanted a cover story for that. And then I met a book publisher, and I was telling the story, and the book publisher said, no, it can't be a magazine cover story, it has to be a book. And then when I decided I'll do a book, then I went into further research. I started researching the whole history of encounter killings in India that started, from the 60s, of how the government forces, so we are not talking of terrorist killing, we are talking of the government forces, how the government forces kill innocent citizens with impunity. Impunity is a very, very important word when you try and understand Indian legal practice and Indian, the whole modern Indian, postmodern India. Impunity is something that is almost like the key word to understand India. I'm not an apologist of India. I'm not going to tell you that India is a beautiful country and India is that country. I think it's important for it's my ethical code to be able to point at the loopholes, point at the flaws, not really point at the glories, because there are several glories and those are there for everyone to see. We are not public. I'm not a public relation agent for India. How do you measure performance in the armed forces? So in Australia, how is performance of the armed forces measured? Yep. What are the hierarchies? You have a colonel, brigadier, like that, right? So you have a captain and a major and a colonel and the brigadier, and then you have a major general, then you have a lieutenant general, then you have a general. So it's a pyramid. Okay, so you have lots of captains, and then you have lots of majors, colonels. It's narrowing down, and then it kind of goes up to one general, right? The chief of the army staff. Now at this level, from the lieutenant colonel to the colonel level, is where the big bloodbath happens, where people have to leave the army. So a lot of people who leave the army don't leave the army because they don't like the army. That's because they have to leave the army. Now, so how do you survive? How do you go up the pyramid? The measurement in India, it will not be the same in Australia, but it's not going to be. It will also have problems because just like media does not have a revenue model, the armed forces does not have a very legitimate moving up level model. So in India, the way to move up is to have a head count. So you have to give a head count every month. That's your performance. How do you perform otherwise? How do you know that an army officer, an army unit is performing, is doing well in an area? How do you grade them? Well, you have to show, because they have been moved into an area of strife, of conflict, right? They're not sitting in Sonipat. There is no conflict here. So, they can't be doing, out here they would have to kill us, but they can't do that. So they are sent to an area. So say, for example, they have been sent to, okay, let me give you a better example. Supposing an army unit has been sent to Kandahar in Afghanistan, okay? Or Kabul. Supposing an Australian army unit has been sent to Sierra Leone or to Kabul. Now, how will you know that they are performing? Or they're chilling, or they're watching movies? So they're going to be told, out there it's going to be like every day you're going to be told, okay, what is the kill? So if you can't show kills, which means you're not performing. So because in India, the army is sent to only areas which are disturbed areas, there's something called a Disturbed Areas Act. So first you impose or invoke the Disturbed Areas Act, then you call the army, and then you give them the power. They operate under a very draconian act which was passed in 1958, an emergency act called the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which is one of the biggest human right violations in this country. And again, impunity is very closely the word that is associated to this, where an army man below the rank of an officer can shoot someone based on suspicion and get away, which means under the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, this army personnel cannot be tried in the regular court of law. So because you have the immunity of Armed Forces Special Powers Act, you can, get away with impunity. And this is what, so the Disturbed Areas Act is invoked, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act comes in, and the army personnel goes and kills. He kills because he's asked for a head count. I start the book by a story which was chilling to the bones because I experienced that. I was driving up the hills of Bhutan, along the hills of Bhutan on the Indian side, and there was a school buddy of mine who was a police officer in one of the posts out there. I'd heard about the fact that he was there. He was a year senior to me, I think. And so I stopped over. I called him up. So he had said that you must stop over for tea. I stopped over, went to his office, and a young officer, army officer, but without the uniform, walked in. It's very easy to identify an army officer because of their, the body language and the way they behave themselves. So he came in. He was very well behaved. He came and he said, "Excuse me, sir." And the friend of mine said, "Yeah, come in." Now this guy, because we were sitting there, was a little hesitant to speak. So this friend of mine said, "Oh, don't worry, they are my school." He's a school friend of mine, but he didn't say that I was a journalist. He said, "I was a school friend of mine," and he says, "What can I do?" It's very unlikely that an army officer would come to a police officer for help. Okay, so because they are, though they are supposed to be working together, but there's a lot of hierarchical differences. And he asked my friend, he says, "I'm really sorry, but I've had an overdraft. I desperately need some money if you could lend me some." You know what is overdraft? So you've kind of, drawn too much from the bank. Excuse me. I found it very strange because an army officer wouldn't come to a police officer asking for money. But I thought maybe they are good friends, But he was very formal as well. So he was not like a friend. I mean, friend would be calling up. He wouldn't be coming out here to his office to ask. So this friend of mine said, I am also running really short, but let me see what I can do. And the other guy says, I'll, return it as soon as I can. This whole conversation was happening in front of me. I was having tea. I was kind of not paying so much attention to it, but I was still kind of over here. And he picks up the phone, my friend, and he tells somebody that he speaks somebody, and I can understand that language in which he was speaking. And he said, and then he puts the phone down, then he tells him, he says, "Okay," he says, "this was really tough, but tomorrow around 4 a.m, if you can come on the bank of whatever river, and it'll be given." So basically, what happened was this young army officer had killed one person. Inadvertently, there was a typographical error in the message that he sent up to the headquarters, and he said 2 persons were killed. Now, since he was so junior, he couldn't, change that error and tell his boss that no, it wasn't 2, it was 1. So he wanted to kill one more person. Now, you don't go to the road and just pick up a person and kill. I mean, that is going to be a problem, okay? I mean, you could do that, but, you land up in problems. So he came to this police officer to seek that, can you lend one person to be killed? And this gentleman with whom I went to school was sent at 4 a.m., asked him to come to the banks of the river to get his other person. So the person will be killed, and on his toe there'll be a little thread with a little strip of paper written from which terrorist organization he belonged, and that's it. That's how we will. He'll be buried. No one will ask questions, because how do you prove he's not? Because they'll provide proof that he is. So now let me tell you how this mafia works. So where will you get these people from to kill? So first is that I told you the measurement or the grading of army units and army personnel is because of the head count. Now they can't go and, they used to actually go killing people, but they got into serious trouble. So then the mafia came in. See, business opportunities always come from challenges. Now these are the business opportunities. The mafia said that, all right, we will identify people who, if you kill, there will be no backlash. There will be no one is going to. So you identify people who don't have families. You identify people who do not have identity cards. You identify people who are just fresh migrants, illegal migrants into your country. People who don't have friends. People who have just moved into a new place. People who are regular jailbirds, who just stepped out of the jail, you pick them up. So then they are taken to a nursery. They're kept out there, observed for the next 7 days whether their disappearance has caused any kind of situation. If not, kill them. And so you kill and you move up. That's how it works. The other mafia supplies weapons. Because when you're killing, if I want to kill you in an encounter, then you should be shooting at me, right? Now I can't be placing my gun on you, because each gun has a registration number and that can come back to me. So I need to put a gun in your hand and then prepare a judicial report. And that's a place where the judiciary has failed us, because time and again these reports that were fictional reports were passed off as kind of as proper reports. Now I think the judiciary is going through reams and reams of these and is questioning the efficacy and also the legitimacy of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. But this is an act by the Parliament. It should have been the executive's duty to actually do away with the act. And how can you have an emergency act which was enacted in 1958 to be in place in this country for 60 years? When you have an emergency act running in this country for 60 years, then the country clearly is in an internal emergency. The internal emergency that was imposed in this country in 1975 actually hasn't gone away. India still lives in a state of emergency. If I can be shot based on suspicion by an agent of the government, then there's a serious problem in this country. And if as a if as a law student, if as a journalism student, or as a journalist, or as a legal practitioner, we do not raise that, then we are not doing our duty. And I think we are not raising those enough. People are raising. There is independent journalism happening. There is judicial activism happening, but not enough. We need to create much, much more noise to be able to. Imagine mafias. And interestingly, I actually had the numbers. So I called them up because, I couldn't believe it. And I, as a journalist, did not know these mafia existed. So I was a little not happy with myself that I kind of went through many years without knowing that these guys existed. So one of them was called Charlie, and I called him up. And look at his impunity. Usually people in the gray, they keep changing their SIM cards, okay? So they don't have the same number. He had the same number. So Charlie and this must be the number only for buying human heads. So this must be a secret number. But anyway, when I called him up, his first response to me was, in Hindi, was, "How many do you want?" So I said, "I want 2." I said, what would be the cost? He said, and this is how it works. He said, well, that unit also has been asking for one, and this unit has also been asking for one. So can we auction it? So human beings are auctioned. And the highest bidder is given. And then, they're transferred on to the person. And then you take, so I asked these people, I said, how do you kill them? As in do they try to run away? Do they cry? Do they plead? What do they do? So they said, no, at the moment of killing, you see, they said we can't tie their hands because it's an encounter happening, right? So if you tie your hands, then there'll be mark out here. And the post-mortem, you're going to have a problem. In some places, they don't even give a damn. They just kill. So they said that there hasn't been a case where the victim tried to even run away. They just kind of surrender and submit because they know that there is nothing else. So while we talk about the ISIS, beheading people and showing videos, I mean, we have government agents in many countries around the world who actually, with impunity, kill innocent civilians who do not have an identity because you need to kill. Killing is important to maintaining law and order. I mean, I'm just saying the way the government thinks. And these are the questions that, these are the issues that we need to raise. And it's not, I mean, as students, you all shouldn't limit and restrict yourself only to Australia. I mean, because these are issues which impact people anywhere in the world, right? And I think we need to, that's what your previous speaker was saying, that stretch your mind. And I like that word. So you need to stretch yourself and see, don't keep yourself only within Australia. See what the ramifications, what the impact, what the kind of violation, human right violation is happening across the world, around the world.
You're talking about powerless people or having, I guess, most of the hands of government officials. One of our other speakers was talking about caste and how the majority of, well, she said that the majority of powerful media officials and journalists are from higher castes in India. Do you mind touching on how that might, or do you think that affects the way that news is printed or how journalism is carried out? The people reporting from high caste?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Not just caste, we also have a gender problem. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you look around the world and find out how many editors are women, hardly. How many deans in universities are women? It's still very much a male domain. So, I mean, I can't think of a single female editor in India, which is a travesty. Okay, so we are, I mean, caste is and the way it's written. So we do not have Dalit. Dalit is the lowest caste. We do not have Dalit journalists. We have maybe a couple of them here and there, but I mean, overall it would be an upper caste. I mean, the other day, in fact, yesterday, it was, I was sitting and asking myself, I curate a festival, and this festival is coming up on February. It's an art festival I do in Delhi. And it's an art, migration, and livelihood. And I was kind of, the schedule has been finalized, and it's kind of sending out the invites, and I was looking at the calendar, and I was ashamed, but I can't be an apologist because it's not happening. It was like the artist, the panelist, the musician, everybody, almost everybody, at least 70% of them were upper caste. And it's not like a conscious choice. It's like supposing I am having a panel discussion on the Second World War and another on the Silk Route. Now, I looked around for experts around that field around the world, and you would end up getting an upper caste person. And probably even a higher chance would be a male. So it would be a male upper caste, that we are talking about. When I'm saying upper caste, where there is no caste in our country, there is an elite, right? And somehow we have a global elite. And the global elite speaks in the same language. The global elite's vocabulary is the same. We connect better. And we seem to be carrying the burden of the rest of the people on our shoulders. Actually, we don't, but we pretend to. And that's why the rest of the world does not get represented. So there's no representation of the world anywhere. I mean, you go to the US. I mean, what the US media? I mean, what does the US media represent? I mean, look at the size of the US and look at the coverage of the US media. I mean, it's abysmal, the kind of coverage they have, given the resources that they have. I don't know. You tell me, how's the Australian media? Because I said I have no idea about the Australian media. I was once offered I actually put down I suddenly remembers now about I don't know which year it was. I think I'm forgetting which year, but I was offered a post by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. And I didn't take it up because someone told me that in Australia there can't be any news. As in, they said that as a journalist, it's not a very challenging assignment. I mean, in Afghanistan is a challenging assignment. I mean, though you may die, but so it's nice to walk on minefields, but to walk on lovely beaches, I'm not very sure as a journalist. So what is it? How vibrant is it?
Avocados in Mexico, like rolling on the highway and getting crushed or something. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
As compared to India, I think it's very independent on the face of it. Maybe I don't know the back of the house, but on the face of it, it seems very independent. Because in India, like mostly news channels, seems like they all belong to a particular political party. I think only NDTV mostly like educated people trust nowadays, or Ravish Kumar.
But we are being shut down. No, we're virtually dead now. Shutters are down more or less. So yeah, but otherwise, what is the content that you have in Australia of news?
It depends, like whether it's like state, like as in is it official kind of like media agency, or whether it's like independent. So I think one of the things that in Australia with Vice, I'm not sure whether.
Vice is pretty big now.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think Australia is one of the only places in the world that has actually made Vice more mainstream. So now there's like a partnership between Vice and SBS, which allows them to broadcast on TV and have collaborations. And also in Australia we have a very strong focus on multiculturalism. And because of that, a lot of with this SBS, the Special Broadcasting Corporation, they have a base in Sydney, also in Melbourne, and they just run 24/7 at different time slots, like with different languages. So it's more focusing on like inclusivity and focusing more on domestic
that more at the moment with the ABC, the channel you mentioned, because they're quite seen as independent. Recently, yeah, they've had a lot of it's kind of like an ongoing battle with the ABC, and our government's quite conservative, a bit right wing. So yeah, it's funny to see like they're trying to get rid of the power of the ABC and cut funding, and there's a lot of people that are like, no, we need it to be independent. Because the other channel is kind of like a current affair and a bit dumbed down, kind of Aussie beach news, like, oh, there's a kangaroo on the road. It's like, yeah. So that's really interesting that you were offered that job. Yeah, ABC's got a lot of respect, as well as SBS as well.
Yeah, actually, recently there was well, it hasn't really surfaced much, but it's I guess a case example of a current affair. Some of their stories are actually advertisements.
Yeah, you know what to be asked.
They do a case story on some wonder drug, for instance, the case that I've been volunteering with. It's a wonder drug that's supposed to help with ADHD, and it's, some miracle, whatever. And they never have many references, and those references that they do have just doctors who have been paid to support their claims. And there's no evidence to back up what they're saying. And actually there's a big problem at the moment with trying to put in claims against what was complaints resolution panel, but it's being absorbed into the Therapeutic Goods Administration, which is a bad thing because at least the complaints resolution panel was independent, or has independent members, and the Therapeutic Goods Advertising Council. But they're both being absorbed, and the problem was that the current affairs screen had been accused of being an advertisement for this wonder drug, Pranol, and basically the people that submitted the complaint couldn't actually follow up whether that complaint had even been dealt with, and yeah, basically the current affair gets away with basically advertising, and everyone puts their faith in it, but it's just bullshit. It's been bought out by corporations and much the same. So yeah, there's 3 channels which are pretty much rubbish: Channel 10, 7, and 9. Although they do have some fun ones like Cops sometimes.
Yeah. Okay, the same story almost. It's becoming the same story everywhere. It's what we call out here the paid news. So, and they legitimize, they've justified it. They're saying that, yeah, we will take money to do your news, but since we are journalists, we'll cross-check the facts that you've given us, but we'll carry it. So, I mean, there's a school of thought saying that, what's wrong in that? So, a product, I'm going to advertise your product, but I'm going to, do due diligence to see what you're saying is right or not, and then I'm going to take money from you. But, I mean, as I or many of my peers would say, that's not acceptable. I mean, that's public relations, and that's not just public relations. That's really bad public relations, because your public relations people at least are not saying that they're doing journalism and they're doing this. I mean, that's then entirely advertising.
The ABC has a TV show called Q&A, where it's a rotating panel every week of politicians, journalists, I guess key figures in whatever political debate is ongoing, and there's a host who kickstarts the discussion, but then members of the public can ask questions either on Twitter or in the audience. So I guess that it's on every Monday night, so it kind of plays into whatever's the main, I guess.
So where all have you all visited so far in India? What all have you done so far?
Only place we have been to is Jokidani so far.
Oh, and you all are staying here?
Yeah.
In the campus?
Yeah.
Isn't it cold here?
Yes.
It is. And there's no heating.
There is
There is? Okay.
portable heater.
Because I'm not staying here. I've shifted to Delhi, and I just came down today for this, and I go back. Delhi is more warmer. So you haven't done the other circuit, but you all are going to those places.
Yeah.
Are you
We're going to Delhi today.
today?
Yeah.
Okay.
Up to law school, I think.
Law
Or
Institute.
Law Institute.
Lawn Street, yeah. Or that talk in the evening. And
We're going to Agra on the weekend.
okay.
Saturday.
Yeah.
And you're having vegetarian food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. But that's not entirely Indian food, huh? Indian food is a lot of non-vegetarian food. Yeah.
We had chicken last night, which was nice.
Where did you get chicken last night?
So they had some chicken, like the curry chicken in like the food court, and so they just like told us.
Is the food court open now?
Yeah, so they have 3 outlets there that's open, which is kind of nice. I think.
Okay,
Gives
yeah.
us a bit more options.
Yeah, no options. Cool. So fine, thank you so much. I think
We've only got 6 minutes till the next class.
yeah. I was till 12:30, so I've kind of wrapped up 12:25. What's your next class?